Imagine a moment in human history when the very survival of our species teetered on the edge of oblivion, when the rhythms of daily life hunting, farming, speaking, dreaming could have been silenced forever, and yet humanity endured. The event I'm about to describe is rarely found in standard textbooks, yet it shaped the evolutionary trajectory of our species more than any empire, revolution, or famous battle ever did. Historians, archaeologists, and geneticists now agree that somewhere between 70,000 and 75,000 years ago, an unprecedented global catastrophe struck the human population. This was not a war waged by armies with spears and arrows, nor a plague that spread invisibly through crowded cities. It was a convergence of cosmic and terrestrial forces, a natural calamity so immense that it nearly erased the human imprint from the earth. Yet out of this calamity, a subtle and fascinating narrative emerges, one that connects the human brain, collective behavior, and the deep mechanisms of adaptation in ways we are only beginning to understand. To truly appreciate this ancient war against extinction, we must explore it not just as a series of historical events, but as a psychological and evolutionary challenge that tested the limits of perception, resilience, and the capacity for social cohesion. The immediate trigger was a cataclysmic volcanic eruption, the Toba supereruption on the island of Sumatra, Indonesia, considered the largest volcanic event in the last 2 million years. Contemporary geological studies estimate that the eruption ejected approximately 2,800 cubic kilometers of magma into the atmosphere, blanketing the sky with sulfur aerosols and ash, creating a volcanic winter that cooled the Earth, as surfaced by an estimated 3 to 5 degrees Celsius. In ecological terms, such a temperature shift might appear minor. Yet for hunter-gatherer societies dependent on fragile ecosystems, the impact was catastrophic. Plant life wilted, animal populations declined, and food scarcity became a relentless pressure. The human brain, wired to interpret environmental signals and assess risk, suddenly faced stimuli it had never evolved to process: prolonged darkness, unpredictable food sources, and the acute threat of collective mortality. Neuropsychologists suggest that such extreme environmental stress would trigger heightened cortisol levels, activating both fight or flight responses and intricate social problem-solving behaviors. Communities would need to reorganize rapidly, forming more cohesive social bonds, redistributing resources, and developing emergent leadership structures to survive. Yet, paradoxically, the very same stress that threatened annihilation may have catalyzed the evolution of complex cognition and cooperation. Anthropologists now theorize that the surviving human population, reduced to as few as 3,000 to 10,000 individuals globally, underwent what is known as a genetic bottleneck. In genetic terms, this bottleneck was akin to forcing an intricate network to condense into a fragile core. Imagine a power grid where most connections are severed, leaving only critical nodes intact. The network can fail entirely, or it can reconfigure itself, emerging more resilient to future disruptions. The survivors of Toba represent those critical nodes. Their collective behaviors, decision-making strategies, and perhaps even random genetic advantages became amplified in the human lineage. Stress, scarcity, and threat created a crucible in which the mental and social frameworks of humanity were refined. Consider perception, the interface between the external world and the brain's internal model. Under normal conditions, human perception allows for efficient navigation of daily life, filtering vast sensory information into manageable patterns. In extreme scenarios such as post-Toba survival, perception itself becomes adaptive. What once appeared inconsequential, a slight rustle in the underbrush, a shifting pattern of clouds, could signal life or death. This selective amplification of sensory cues parallels the way societies respond to crisis signals today, with rapid cultural evolution following catastrophic events. Human societies, even at this early stage, functioned as energetic networks. Each individual contributed to the overall flow of resources, information, and cooperation. When Toba's eruption disrupted ecological and social equilibrium, it was as if a sudden blackout swept across a city. Nodes that were flexible, communicative, and capable of innovation carried the network forward. Communities with rigid hierarchies or isolated behaviors were far less likely to survive. In essence, vulnerability became a hidden advantage. The very weakness that might have seemed fatal, the capacity for fear, for adaptive social negotiation, for rapid behavioral shifts, served as a safeguard for the species. Historians and evolutionary psychologists point to this as an example of counterintuitive resilience. The systems that endure are often those that embrace adaptability, uncertainty, and collective intelligence, not raw strength or rigid order. Philosophically, this episode invites reflection on the meaning of survival itself. Humanity's near extinction at Toba illustrates that our species does not progress linearly, nor does survival guarantee dominance. Instead, it is contingent upon the dynamic interplay between environmental pressures, neural mechanisms, and social coordination. The cognitive architectures that allowed humans to navigate post-Toba landscapes, abstract reasoning, foresight, empathy, and symbolic communication, later became the scaffolding for language, culture, and complex civilizations. In effect, every societal achievement we now consider foundational storytelling. Art, ritual, trade was incubated in the shadows of near annihilation. It is worth pondering, if Toba had eradicated a few more nodes, if the network had collapsed slightly differently, the history of language, philosophy, and science might have been erased before it ever began. This brings us to a profound psychological insight. Stress and collective threat, often perceived as purely destructive forces, are also agents of innovation and cohesion. Modern studies of disaster psychology show that communities under acute threat tend to exhibit intensified cooperation, altruism, and shared problem-solving. These traits, magnified over millennia, can be traced back to episodes such as the Toba bottleneck, suggesting that our brains and societies are wired not merely to survive but to transform in response to existential risk. Let's explore the cognitive dimension more deeply. Neuroscientists theorize that extreme scarcity conditions prompt a reevaluation of risk-reward calculations in the human brain. Neural circuits governing memory, attention, and executive function are particularly sensitive to environmental stressors. In Toba-era humans, this likely led to enhanced strategic planning, anticipatory behavior, and cooperative negotiation. In other words, adversity sculpted the human mind, selecting for the capacity to predict, communicate, and innovate under conditions of uncertainty. This is mirrored in modern behavioral economics, where groups facing systemic stress often develop emergent norms that optimize resource distribution and reduce conflict. The metaphor is striking. Consider the human brain as a decentralized system, each neuron a node, contributing to overall stability. Catastrophic events like Toba function as stress tests, revealing vulnerabilities but also strengthening interconnections among surviving nodes. Similarly, human societies under extreme pressure reveal latent capacities for coordination, moral reasoning, and symbolic communication. History, in this sense, becomes a narrative not only of events but of network optimization. Another layer to consider is the role of randomness and contingency. No deterministic algorithm dictates which humans survived Toba. Genetic variation, geographic luck, and social structures all interacted in complex, unpredictable ways. Yet from this apparent chaos emerged a coherent trajectory for the human species. Philosophically, this raises questions about the interplay between chance and necessity, chaos and order. The survivors were not necessarily the strongest, fastest, or most numerous. They were those whose networks, both neural and social, could flex under extreme conditions. Their capacity for adaptation became the hidden lever by which humanity would later expand across continents, develop agriculture, invent writing, and eventually explore the cosmos. Let's pause to consider the metaphorical resonance. Just as the Toba bottleneck forced humans to recalibrate their perception and social networks, contemporary societies confront analogous challenges. Climate change, pandemics, and technological disruption act as global stressors, testing our collective resilience. By studying how early humans navigated existential risk, we gain insight into the psychological and systemic tools necessary for modern survival. We also confront a paradoxical truth. Weakness, vulnerability, and uncertainty are not merely obstacles to overcome, they are catalysts for intelligence, creativity, and moral growth. Returning to the ancient past, the aftermath of the Toba eruption presents a fascinating archaeological and genetic puzzle. Fossil evidence from Africa, India, and Southeast Asia suggests dramatic population declines, yet within a few thousand years, human populations rebounded. Genetic analyses reveal signatures of inbreeding and loss of diversity, yet also adaptive mutations that may have facilitated resilience to disease, environmental change, and social stress. These adaptations were not conscious strategies but emergent properties of survival pressures interacting with human cognition and culture. Here, the metaphor of energy networks becomes particularly apt. Just as a damaged electrical grid can be rewired to become more efficient, human societies, reduced to minimal nodes, reorganize themselves to optimize survival. Communication, resource sharing, and cooperation were reinforced. Inefficient or isolated behaviors were pruned. The system as a whole became more robust, not through planning, but through selective pressures acting on the neural, behavioral, and social levels simultaneously. This process, repeated across generations, shaped the very architecture of human societies. Language, storytelling, ritual, and symbolic behavior all expanded in the wake of Toba, providing cognitive scaffolds for social cohesion, moral reasoning, and cultural transmission. The human mind became a system not only for individual survival, but for the propagation and optimization of collective knowledge. Consider a thought experiment. If the eruption had occurred in isolation, without the social networks and cognitive flexibility of early Homo sapiens, extinction might have been inevitable. But because humans are wired for empathy, learning, and cooperation, even the most dire environmental signals could be interpreted, responded to, and integrated into collective strategies. Vulnerability became strength, fear became foresight, scarcity became innovation. In psychological terms, this is a profound lesson about the interplay between stress, perception, and adaptation. Our brains are not simply reactive organs. They are anticipatory systems capable of simulating future scenarios, evaluating risk, and coordinating action across complex networks of individuals. These abilities, honed under extreme conditions, underpin every subsequent achievement of human civilization. There's a subtle twist to this narrative that challenges conventional thinking. The very fragility we often associate with disaster, the dependence on fragile networks, the susceptibility to environmental perturbations, the uncertainty inherent in social coordination is exactly what safeguards complex systems against total collapse. In network theory, redundancy, diversity, and distributed processing are key to resilience. The Toba bottleneck illustrates that sometimes what appears as weakness is actually a latent form of protection. The survivors' sensitivity, their capacity for cooperation, and their emergent social intelligence functioned as a firewall against extinction. Today, as we examine genetic markers, fossil records, and archaeological sites, we see evidence of this hidden resilience. Homo sapiens, unlike Neanderthals or other contemporaneous hominins, survived not because of brute force, but because of adaptive cognition, social flexibility, and emergent collective intelligence. The ancient war against annihilation was won not on battlefields, but within the neural networks of individuals, the social networks of small communities, and the intricate web of relationships between humans and their environment. As we reflect on this episode, it invites us to reconsider how we view adversity, weakness, and threat. History is filled with narratives that celebrate triumphs of strength, conquest, and technological achievement. Yet the survival of our species hinged on subtle, almost invisible processes: the amplification of cooperation, the refinement of perception under stress, and the capacity to reorganize networks in the face of catastrophic disruption. These processes, invisible in the moment, create the long-term conditions for resilience, innovation, and cultural flourishing. In philosophical terms, Toba challenges the illusion of control. Humanity is not a linear, deterministic force marching toward progress. We are, at every moment, contingent actors in a complex system of environmental, neural, and social interactions. Our survival depends less on domination and more on attunement, our ability to perceive subtle signals, adapt our behavior, and coordinate with others in the face of uncertainty. Finally, the story of the Toba supereruption offers a deeply human insight. The boundaries of survival are not defined by brute strength, but by the capacity to transform fear into foresight, scarcity into cooperation, and vulnerability into resilience. Each crisis, ancient or modern, functions as both a test and a teacher, revealing the hidden architecture of our minds and societies. By examining the neural, social, and ecological dynamics that allowed humanity to endure near annihilation, we gain not only historical knowledge but also a blueprint for navigating contemporary existential challenges. It is a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the human system individually and collectively has the potential to reorganize, adapt, and emerge stronger. So, the next time you confront uncertainty, whether in your personal life or as part of a global community, remember that our species survived catastrophes far greater than any we face today. The ancient war that almost wiped out humanity was not fought with weapons or armies, but with networks of perception, cooperation, and adaptability. The subtle forces of stress, fear, and scarcity were harnessed by the human mind to create the conditions for survival. And perhaps the most profound lesson is this: our perceived weaknesses are often our most potent strengths. History, psychology, and philosophy converge to reveal that resilience is not the absence of danger, but the capacity to navigate it intelligently and collectively. Humanity endured Toba not because it was strong, but because it was aware, adaptable, and interconnected. These are the same qualities that will guide us through future challenges. As we reflect on this extraordinary chapter in human history, I invite you to consider a question that transcends time. In the face of existential threats, how will we as individuals and societies harness our hidden capacities to survive, adapt, and thrive? Share your thoughts in the comments below, engage with the ideas, and if you found this journey through time and mind fascinating, like this video and subscribe to Past Lens for more explorations of the deep and often hidden forces that shape human history. The story of Toba is not just a tale of destruction, it is a meditation on the human condition, a testament to our adaptability, and a mirror reflecting the latent power within us all.